Lena Kovac had spent 14 years watching ships that never approached. The observation deck wrapped around Station Kepler-9's northern arc, transparent alloy offering unobstructed views of the quarantine perimeter. She arrived each morning at 600, made coffee in the small preparation area, and settled into her designated station with movements perfected over thousands of identical mornings. The consortium vessels appeared as distant points of bioluminescent color against the black, emerald, sapphire, sometimes deep coral. They maintained patrol routes with mathematical precision, never deviating, never approaching closer than protocols allowed. Lena tracked their spectral signatures, logged movements, compiled reports that were read by committees on Earth, and filed into databases no one would probably access again. She was 42. She had been competent her entire adult life. Her colleagues rotated through 6-month assignments and returned to Earth with stories and families and lives that continued in directions she had stopped imagining for herself. Lena signed contract extensions without hesitation. The station was quiet. The work was consistent. There were no surprises here, and she had structured her existence around the absence of surprises. The coffee was always slightly bitter. She drank it black, standing at the observation window, watching patrol routes that never changed. Her reflection stared back, angular features, dark hair pulled into the same efficient knot she'd worn since graduate school, eyes holding the particular emptiness of someone who had become very good at not wanting things. The morning of the Blight's arrival began like every other. She logged standard patrol signatures, ran diagnostics, sent her daily report to Earth's Xenobiological Committee with the same summary she'd sent for 14 years. No change in consortium activity, no protocol violations, no contact. The distress signal arrived at 10:47 hours. At first, Lena thought it was equipment malfunction, the data stream too chaotic, too fragmented to be intentional communication. But the pattern repeated, and beneath the distortion she recognized consortium transmission protocols. The translation algorithm struggled, spitting out fragments, collapse and dying and help. Her hands moved across the interface with practiced efficiency. The data was authentic. The ship broadcasting it was approaching at speeds that violated every treaty. Lena's heart rate remained steady. She had trained herself out of panic responses years ago. She initiated the emergency contact sequence and watched the approaching vessel with analytical detachment. The ship appeared in close orbit 90 minutes later. Its bioluminescent hull pulsed erratically, light dimming and flaring in patterns suggesting biological distress. Lena had never seen a consortium vessel this close. The detail was overwhelming, organic curves that seemed to grow rather than be built, surfaces shifting between translucent and opaque. The communication came through as raw sensory data. Images flooded her screen, ecosystems collapsing, bodies failing in synchronized waves, entire worlds going dark. The request was simple: help us. Lena stood at her observation post, coffee cooling in her hand, watching the dying ship pulse against the black, and felt 14 years of isolation press against something in her chest she'd thought she'd successfully numbed. Commander Sarah Chen arrived 20 minutes later, slightly out of breath. Chen was 58, competent, followed protocol with the same instinctive adherence Lena brought to her own work. They'd shared this station for 6 years and maintained professional courtesy that never approached friendship. Chen looked at the readings, at the ship, at Lena's carefully neutral expression. "They're requesting emergency docking." "Yes." "That violates every, yes." Chen ran both hands through her short grey hair, a gesture Lena had seen perhaps 3 times in 6 years, always in moments of genuine crisis. "We need authorization from Earth. The communication lag is 40 minutes. They stood together at the observation window. The consortium ship drifted closer, sections of hull completely dark, bioluminescence flickering like struggling heartbeat. "The quarantine protocols exist for a reason," Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Lena said nothing. She had spent 14 years studying those protocols, had written papers on the biological incompatibility between human and consortium cellular chemistry. "They're dying," Lena said. "We don't know that. Look at the biometric data." Chen looked. The readings were unambiguous: metabolic collapse, systemic failure. "Prepare the quarantine airlock," Chen said finally. "Full isolation protocols." The consortium ship docked 43 minutes later. Lena watched through remote cameras as the airlock pressurized, as the inner door opened, as the figure that emerged stepped into human space for the first time in 7 generations. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, humanoid enough to be recognizable, but alien enough to trigger something instinctive and unsettling. Her skin shifted between bioluminescent patterns. Where hair should be, fine sensory tendrils moved in response to air currents. Her eyes were large, reflective, completely black. She took 3 steps and collapsed. Lena's fingers moved across the interface, routing camera feeds, checking atmospheric readings. The sensors showed nothing dangerous, no pathogens, just the alien breathing in ragged rhythms on the floor. "We need to move her to medical," Chen said. "Remote drones can—" "Look at the readings." "She has minutes." Chen was right. The biometric data was degrading in real time. "I'll go," Lena said. The words surprised her. Chen's expression suggested they surprised her too. "You're xenobiology, not medical. I know the contamination risks better than anyone on station." It was true, though it wasn't why she'd volunteered. Perhaps it was 14 years of watching from a distance. Perhaps it was the simple fact that someone was dying, and she was here and she possessed hands that could help. Perhaps she was tired of observing. Chen studied her. Full isolation suit. Any sign of adverse reaction, you evacuate immediately. Lena suited up in the preparation chamber, checking seals with methodical precision. The isolation suit was comprehensive. Full environmental containment, own air supply, haptic feedback systems, allowing interaction without direct contact. She entered the airlock. The envoy was still breathing, barely. Up close, the details were overwhelming. The way her skin shifted through bioluminescent patterns, the subtle wrongness of her proportions, the sensory tendrils that moved even in collapse. Lena knelt beside her, and the envoy's eyes opened, focusing with immense effort. They stared at each other across 7 generations of carefully maintained distance. The envoy's hand moved, faster than seemed possible for someone in systemic failure, and grasped Lena's suited wrist. The grip was strong, desperate. Through the suit's haptic feedback, Lena felt the pressure, the heat, the trembling of alien fingers that held on like she was the last solid thing in a dissolving universe. The medical bay had been prepared for remote treatment. Drones positioned, scanners active, everything controlled from behind reinforced barriers. Lena maneuvered the envoy onto the examination platform, maintaining isolation protocols. The envoy's condition deteriorated while Lena worked. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed erratically. Scanners showed cellular structures collapsing in synchronized waves. Symbiotic networks consuming themselves, partnerships turning parasitic. Chen's voice came through Lena's suitcom. "We have preliminary translation of the ship's logs. And? It's everywhere. The blight. Every consortium world. Billions dying." The number was too large to process. Lena returned her attention to the envoy in front of her. The translation algorithms worked in background, processing fragmented data. Lena read the emerging text with growing understanding. The blight targeted symbiotic networks, the biological cooperation allowing consortium species to share resources, consciousness, metabolic processes. Their greatest evolutionary advantage had become the vector of extinction. And humanity, isolated for 7 generations precisely because human cellular chemistry disrupted those networks, was immune. More than immune. The preliminary models suggested human biochemistry might interrupt the blight's cascade. The compounds making humans incompatible with consortium symbiosis were exactly what was needed to break the pattern consuming the envoy's biology. But those compounds couldn't be synthesized. They required direct, sustained physical contact. Human skin against consortium flesh, hours of continuous touch. Lena stared at the envoy through her suit's faceplate and felt the weight of 14 years of careful isolation press against a decision that was somehow already made. She began removing her suit. "Lena, what are you doing?" Chen's voice was sharp with alarm. "The treatment requires direct contact." "You don't know that for certain. She's dying now." "We have minutes. The contamination risk is acceptable." This was insane. This violated every protocol. But the envoy was dying, and Lena had spent 14 years being cautious, being safe, being so careful that her entire life had become an exercise in avoiding risk. The suit's helmet released with a soft hiss. Lena breathed station air unfiltered for the first time since entering the airlock. It smelled like recycled atmosphere and medical antiseptic and something unfamiliar coming from the envoy. She removed the suit completely and approached the examination platform. The envoy's eyes tracked her movement. Lena placed her palm against the envoy's thorax, feeling the heat of a metabolism burning itself out. The contact sent a jolt through her nervous system. The envoy's skin felt like warm silk over muscle, moving in patterns, subtly wrong, subtly beautiful. The sensory tendrils retracted, then extended, brushing against Lena's wrist with touch so light it felt like breath. The effect was immediate. Where Lena's skin made contact, bioluminescent patterns stabilized, frantic pulsing slowed. The envoy's breathing, three-chambered rhythmic alien, found steadier pace. But Lena could feel something happening in her own body, a strange warmth spreading from the contact point, her heart rate elevating, a dizziness that wasn't entirely unpleasant. The envoy's hand rose, trembling, and rested against Lena's ribs, fingers spreading to maximize contact. Heat between them intensified. Lena could smell something unfamiliar and oddly compelling, could feel her own breathing synchronize with the alien rhythm beneath her palm. "Lena, your vitals!" Chen's voice seemed far away. "I'm stable." They remained pressed together in intimacy that violated every boundary humans and consortium had erected, feeling each other's pulse through skin, never meant to touch. Minutes passed, then an hour. The envoy's system slowly rebuilt itself around human biochemistry, interrupting the blight's progression, but the process required continuous exposure. When Lena tried to pull away, even slightly, the envoy's bioluminescence began destabilizing again. Separation meant relapse. The envoy's eyes, so different yet somehow readable in their desperation and gratitude, never left Lena's face. They maintained contact for 6 hours before the envoy could sustain separation for more than a few minutes. Lena discovered muscles she hadn't known she possessed, holding positions that maximized skin contact while her body cramped and protested. The envoy seemed equally uncomfortable, her alien physiology clearly not designed for sustained immobility. But they both understood the necessity. The envoy's first words came through the translation interface at hour 4. The voice was strange, not quite mechanical but clearly synthesized. "You helped." "Yes," Lena said. "Your species was isolated, protected from contamination." "Yes? You violated that, for me." Lena didn't have an answer that made sense, even to herself. She'd spent 14 years following protocols. And then a stranger had been dying in her airlock, and all that careful isolation had seemed suddenly meaningless. The envoy's fingers moved slightly against Lena's ribs. "My name translates approximately to bridge between stars. You may call me Talis." "Lena, Lena," Talis repeated, and the synthesized voice carried something that might have been warmth. "You are saving my life. I should know your name." More ships arrived over following days. More envoys, more ambassadors, more consortium citizens desperate and dying. Station Kepler 9 became a primary care facility, observation decks and storage bays converted into spaces where humans and aliens pressed together in medical necessity. Lena learned the protocols through practice, how long to maintain contact before her own system needed rest, how to position bodies to maximize skin exposure while minimizing physical strain. She learned Talis's patterns, the way her bioluminescence shifted to indicate comfort or distress, the temperature fluctuations meaning her symbiotic networks were rebuilding or failing again. They developed a routine: 6 hours of contact, 2 hours of separation for Lena to eat, sleep, attend to biological needs. Then back to the medical bay, back to the warmth of alien skin that had become as familiar as her own reflection. Talis was a diplomat, Lena learned. A scholar who had spent her life studying quarantine protocols, understanding reasons for separation between species, advocating for the isolation keeping both human and consortium safe from biological incompatibility. "And now?" Lena asked during one of their long silences. "Now I'm alive because you ignored them." Talis's sensory tendrils drifted across Lena's collarbone. "I am uncertain how to reconcile these things." "Maybe there's nothing to reconcile. Maybe the protocols were right for their time and circumstances changed. Perhaps. The tendrils moved again, sliding along Lena's throat with delicacy that made her breath catch. Or perhaps we were wrong from the beginning, and it required catastrophe to show us. The intimacy was unavoidable. Hours of sustained contact created familiarity transcending species. Lena learned the geography of Talis's body, places where her skin was more sensitive, rhythms of her breathing, small adjustments she made to find comfort. And Talis learned hers, fingers finding tension in Lena's shoulders, stress she carried in her lower back, the way her pulse quickened when tendrils brushed certain areas of exposed skin. It felt medical. It felt necessary. It felt like something else entirely, that neither acknowledged directly. On the 8th day, Talis's system achieved stable independence. She could maintain separation for up to 12 hours before requiring contact again. It should have felt like progress. Instead, Lena found herself watching the timer, counting down hours until their next session with anticipation, having nothing to do with medical necessity. Commander Chen found her at the observation window, her old post, though she'd barely visited it since Talis's arrival. "We need to talk about the next phase," Chen said. Lena knew what was coming. More ships arriving daily. More consortium citizens needing treatment. The stations couldn't handle the volume. "They want volunteers to go to consortium space," Chen continued, "to their medical facilities, population centers, places where the blight is hitting hardest. That's significant escalation. It's necessary, billions are dying. We have the only treatment that works, and it requires human presence. Direct, sustained human presence." Lena watched a new consortium ship drift into docking range, bioluminescence already showing irregular patterns. "Are they asking me specifically?" "Talis requested you. She's being reassigned to coordinate treatment protocols on her homeworld. She asked if you would accompany her." Something in Lena's chest tightened. She'd spent 14 years in this station. The idea of leaving felt enormous. The idea of separating from Talis felt worse. How long would the assignment be? "Indefinite. Until the blight is contained, or—" Chen's voice trailed off. "I need to think about it." Chen nodded and left her at the observation window. Lena stood there as the station's rotation brought Earth into view, a blue sphere wrapped in clouds, home to 8 billion people who had spent 7 generations isolated from the galaxy. She thought about 14 years of routine, about mornings watching ships that never approached, about the careful, controlled life she'd built from ruins of graduate school failures and relationships that had dissolved because she could never quite let anyone close enough to matter. She thought about Talis's fingers against her ribs, about synchronized breathing, about warmth that had started as medical necessity and had become something neither of them knew how to name. The choice was already made. It had been made the moment she'd removed her isolation suit. The transport journey took 6 days. Lena and Talis maintained contact protocols, though on the ship the medical necessity felt less urgent. Talis's system had stabilized to the point where she could manage almost 24 hours between treatments. But the routine persisted. 6 hours of sustained contact each cycle, bodies pressed together, finding positions that had become familiar. Lena noticed things she'd missed in the clinical environment, the way Talis's bioluminescence shifted in response to emotion, not just physical distress. The small sounds she made when comfortable, the temperature gradients across her skin. "Your people must find this strange," Talis said during one session. Her hand rested against Lena's lower back. "The touching. Humans are not generally contact-oriented. Some are. It varies." "And you?" Lena considered. Before Talis, she'd gone months without meaningful physical contact. "I wasn't. Before. And now?" "Now it feels necessary." Talis's tendrils brushed along Lena's shoulder. "Necessary for my biology, yes. But I sense you mean something else." Lena adjusted her position, bringing them into closer contact, and felt Talis's 3-chambered breathing synchronize with her own rhythm. The warmth between them intensified. On the 4th day, the ship passed through a debris field, remains of a consortium station evacuated when the blight hit. Talis stood at the observation portal, bioluminescence dim with grief. "I knew people there," Talis said quietly. "Colleagues, friends. Some made it to evacuation ships. Many did not." Lena stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She wanted to offer comfort through contact the way Talis's biology demanded, but this felt different. This felt like choice rather than medical necessity. Talis solved the problem by leaning slightly, bringing their bodies into full contact. Your species has a saying about shared grief being lessened. Grief shared is grief diminished. Is that true? I don't know. I've never really tested it. You have experienced loss, though. I can feel it in the way you hold yourself. Lena watched the debris field drift past. Graduate school, I was engaged. She wanted vulnerability, emotional availability, openness that terrified me. So I gave her competence instead. Research, achievement, all the things that didn't require me to actually feel anything. She left, and I decided that was fine, that I was better off alone, focusing on work, avoiding anything requiring me to be less than perfectly controlled. Talis's tendrils moved across Lena's neck. And now you are here, touching an alien for 6 hours each cycle, being vulnerable in the most literal biological sense. Yes. What changed? Lena turned to meet Talis's dark eyes. You were dying. And I was tired of watching from a distance. Talis's world was called something Lena's throat couldn't pronounce. The translation interface rendered it as the gathering place. The planet appeared as a sphere of deep blues and greens, bioluminescent cities visible from orbit. Or they should have been. Lena could see disruption even from space, areas of darkness spreading, coordinated rhythms breaking into chaos. The medical facility where they docked was enormous, a structure seeming to grow organically from the planet's surface. Its bioluminescence was dim, struggling. Thousands of consortium citizens filled its chambers, dozens of species, all suffering the same cascading collapse. Human volunteers were scattered throughout, pressed against alien bodies in scenes that would have violated every protocol weeks ago. Talis led her through corridors that adapted to their presence. They reached a private chamber, not quite medical, not quite residential. This will be our primary space, Talis explained. You will treat multiple patients. But my role is coordination, and coordination requires stable biology. We will maintain our regular contact protocols. Understood. Talis's bioluminescence dimmed. You could have stayed on your station. This was not required. I know. Then why am I important enough that you would leave your world? Lena set down her bag. 14 years I watched ships from a distance. And then you were dying, and touching you was the only thing that mattered. I don't know how to go back to distance after that. Talis crossed the space in 3 smooth strides. Her hands found Lena's face, fingers spreading across cheeks and jaw. I was dying. You saved me. And now I find I do not wish to exist without your proximity. The admission hung between them, too honest, too vulnerable. Lena leaned into the touch, her own hands rising to rest against Talis's thorax. We have work to do. Patients who need treatment. Yes, we should maintain professional boundaries. We should. Neither moved away. The work began. Lena assigned to a rotation of 12 patients, each requiring 6 hours of sustained contact over 10-day treatment periods. Between rotations there was Talis. Their sessions together felt different, less medical, more deliberate. Talis described a life spent in diplomatic service, maintaining careful boundaries between species. She had believed in separation, in wisdom of keeping dangerous things apart. I wrote papers arguing against early contact with humanity, she admitted. I considered your species a contamination risk. I advocated for extending the quarantine indefinitely. And now you are pressed against me 6 hours each cycle, and your contamination is the only thing keeping me alive. I am uncertain whether to laugh or weep at the universe's irony. Lena's fingers traced patterns on Talis's skin. Do you regret it? The contact? I regret the blight. I regret the billions dead. But regret this? Regret you? No. The intimacy escalated gradually. Touches lingered longer. Positions shifted to bring them closer. Lena learned to read Talis's bioluminescence like language, the shift to warmer colors when content, deepening blues when thoughtful, the particular pattern appearing when Lena's hands found certain sensitive areas. And Talis learned to read Lena, the tension in her shoulders when overwhelmed, the slight quickening of breath when tendrils brushed her neck, the way she unconsciously pressed closer when uncertain. On their 23rd cycle together, Talis voiced what they'd both been carefully not acknowledging. This has become more than medical necessity. Lena's hand stilled against Talis's skin. Yes, your species has customs around such things, protocols for intimacy that is chosen rather than required. We do. I am uncertain of those protocols. I do not wish to violate them. Or you. Lena lifted her head to meet Talis's eyes. What do you want? I want this to be choice. Not biology, not medical necessity. Choice. It has been, Lena said quietly. For a while now. Talis's bioluminescence brightened. Then I choose you. Your proximity, your warmth, your strange human independence that should repel me and instead draws me closer. Lena kissed her. The mechanics were complicated by anatomy, but Talis understood the intention, her tendrils wrapping gently around Lena's head, her own mouth finding Lena's in contact that was clumsy and perfect and absolutely deliberate. They learned each other that cycle in ways transcending medical treatment, finding pleasure and connection in warmth between them, in synchronized breathing that had started as biological necessity and had become choice. Time moved differently on the gathering place. Days blurred into weeks, marked only by patient rotations, gradual stabilization of the facility's bioluminescence, small victories of bodies that stopped failing. Lena fell into rhythm, 6 hours treating assigned patients, 2 hours for her own needs, 6 hours with Talis. On the 41st cycle, Lena's rotation included a consortium citizen named Veris, whose symbiotic network had degraded to critical levels. The first session was standard, but during the second session something changed. Veris's biology began responding too strongly, her system attempting to bond with Lena's in ways exceeding simple treatment. Lena felt it, a pulling sensation, warmth intensifying beyond familiar parameters, her heart rate spiking in ways having nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with biological systems trying to integrate in ways they were never designed for. She maintained contact, trying to moderate responses, to give Veris the treatment she needed without allowing the connection to deepen dangerously. But Veris was dying, and dying biology doesn't respect boundaries. Her hands gripped Lena with desperate strength, and somewhere in the struggle to save her, Lena felt something in herself begin to fray. The session ended at 6 hours. Veris stabilized. Lena returned to her private chamber and stood under the facility's approximation of shower, letting water wash over skin that felt hypersensitive and invaded. Talis found her there, still dressed, sitting on the chamber floor with water streaming around her. Lena, I'm fine. You are not fine. Lena looked up. Talis stood in the entrance, tendrils moving with concern, bioluminescence dim and worried. She was dying. Her system tried to bond with mine, pull me into her symbiotic network. I could feel it, this hunger for connection, this desperate need to not be alone in dissolution, and I had to hold boundaries every instinct in her biology was trying to violate. Talis knelt, heedless of water. Her hands found Lena's face. You gave her what she needed. No more, no less. That is all this work requires. But it's not enough. She needs more sessions. And everyone is going to be like this. You cannot save everyone, Talis said quietly. Some will survive, some will not. All you can do is provide treatment and maintain yourself. If you give everything, you will have nothing left. Not for other patients, not for yourself, not for me. Lena leaned into Talis's touch. What if I can't do this? Then you stop. You rest. You remember that you are human, and humans were never designed for sustained intimacy with dying aliens. They stayed like that, pressed together on the chamber floor with water streaming around them, until Lena's breathing steadied. Veris died on the 7th treatment session. Lena was maintaining contact, had been for 4 hours, when she felt the shift, bioluminescence guttering, 3-chambered breathing stuttering, desperate grip weakening. The blight had progressed too far. Human biochemistry could interrupt the cascade, but it couldn't rebuild what had already dissolved. Lena held her through the dying. Veris's bioluminescence faded to nothing, then extinguished, and Lena was left kneeling over an alien body, having failed. She reported the death with clinical precision, returned to her chamber, stood in the shower again, scrubbing her skin until it felt raw. Talis found her curled on their shared furniture, dry but shaking. "I'm sorry," Talis said, her bioluminescence deep blue with grief. "I knew it was possible, but knowing and feeling are different." Talis settled beside her, not touching yet, giving her choice. "You stayed with her until the end. That was kind. It wasn't enough. It never is. But it was what you could give." Lena turned to look at her. "How do you accept that some people can't be saved? I have lost many people to the blight." "I accept it because the alternative is to stop trying to save anyone, and that is unacceptable. Even when it breaks you? Even then?" Talis extended one hand, palm up, offering contact without demanding it. "You are allowed to grieve. Those are human responses. They do not make you weak." Lena took the offered hand. "I don't know how to do this. How to touch strangers with enough intimacy to save them while holding back enough of myself to survive when they die." "Then perhaps you are trying to maintain boundaries that should not exist. Perhaps the answer is not less feeling but more, to allow yourself to grieve each loss, to feel the full weight of it and to carry on anyway." "That sounds impossible." "Yes. Most worthwhile things are." Lena pulled Talis closer, needing the familiar warmth, the three-chambered heartbeat that meant alive and stable and present. The next morning, Lena returned to work. New patient rotation. 6 hours of sustained contact with a consortium citizen whose bioluminescence was already showing irregular patterns. Lena pressed her palm against their thorax and felt the warmth, the stuttering rhythm. She maintained contact, monitored responses. Professional, clinical, competent. And underneath, a grief she didn't try to suppress, a weight she carried into the contact rather than leaving outside. They stabilized, then improved. On the final session, their tendrils brushed against Lena's wrist in what she'd learned to recognize as gratitude. "You saved my life. I provided treatment. Your biology did the saving." Lena returned to her chamber. Talis was there, reviewing coordination reports. "They're stable," Lena reported. "I saw." "Well done." Lena sank onto their furniture, exhausted. "Is it always like this? One dies, one lives, and you just continue?" "Yes." Talis set aside her reports and pulled Lena close. "The blight does not pause for grief. The work continues. But you are allowed to feel the weight of it." Over following cycles, Lena learned, incrementally, imperfectly. She learned to carry grief without letting it paralyze her, to acknowledge losses without letting them define every subsequent success. She lost 3 more patients, saved 17. The facility stabilized. The blight's progression slowed. The crisis moved from acute to chronic, from emergency to management. And through it all, Lena returned to Talis, 6 hours each cycle that had become the anchor point of her existence. "I love you," Lena said one night, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. Talis's bioluminescence brightened to colors Lena had never seen. "That phrase does not translate precisely, but I understand the meaning." "Yes, that." "Then I love you also." "In my language, it means something like chosen symbiosis, partnership that is deliberate rather than biological." Lena pulled her closer. "What does that mean for us, when this is over?" "I do not know, but I know I want you in whatever future we build, if your species and mine allow it. And if they don't?" Talis's tendrils tightened around Lena's shoulders. "Then we will navigate that together. But I will not willingly return to a universe where touching you is forbidden." The Consortium Council summoned Talis on the 93rd cycle. The message arrived through official channels, formal and urgent. "They want to discuss human integration protocols," Talis explained. "Establish frameworks for ongoing contact." Lena accompanied Talis as her essential contact provider, the official designation allowing human presence in what would traditionally be closed consortium proceedings. The council chamber was vast, walls bioluminescent in patterns responding to assembled representatives' collective mood. Dozens of species sat in arrangements accommodating their varied physiologies, all showing stabilized bioluminescence of successful blight treatment. They had all been saved by human touch. The council moderator acknowledged Talis. "Coordinator Talis, you maintain the most sustained human contact of any consortium citizen. Your insights are essential." "I am honored to serve the council. We must address human integration, 7 generations we maintained isolation. The blight has proven that belief incomplete. We require ongoing human contact to maintain recovery. This creates dependencies our previous protocols never anticipated. The debate continued for hours. Arguments about sovereignty and dependency, about ethics of requiring intimate physical contact as condition of survival, about whether 7 generations of isolation could be dissolved because of crisis. "What do humans want?" the moderator asked finally, addressing Lena directly. Lena thought about the human volunteers scattered across consortium space. The humans doing this work aren't looking for political power. They're here because people were dying and we could help. Whatever comes next needs to honor that. The choice to help, not the obligation to save. A noble sentiment, but insufficient for establishing functional protocols. We need structure, clear boundaries around contact that is medical versus political versus... The pause was deliberate, personal. Talus's bioluminescence shifted to colors indicating discomfort. Personal relationships between species were not anticipated. No, but they have developed nonetheless. Several human volunteers have formed attachments, including you, Coordinator Talus. The Chamber's collective attention focused on them both. Lena felt Talus's hand find hers. "Yes," Talus said, her voice steady. "I have formed an attachment to Dr. Kovac. Our relationship began as medical necessity and evolved into choice. This is my reality, and I will not apologize for it." The statement created ripples of bioluminescent response across the chamber. "We do not ask for apology," the moderator said. "We ask for guidance. If personal relationships between species are possible, then isolation protocols cannot simply be reinstated. But if such relationships become common, the implications are profound. Then perhaps," Lena said quietly, "you should let individuals make those choices rather than creating protocols that decide for them." The debate continued through multiple sessions. Something had shifted. The Council's deliberations had made explicit what she and Talus had been carefully not examining, that their relationship existed in a political context neither controlled. "I don't want to be a case study," Lena said one night. "I don't want our relationship to be evidence for or against integration protocols." "Neither do I." Talus's tendrils moved across Lena's shoulders. "But we exist in a universe that is watching. Our choices have implications whether we intend them to or not. So what do? We continue. We make our choices deliberately. We accept that we cannot control how others interpret our existence." Lena pulled back enough to meet Talus's eyes. "I want a life with you, not a political statement, a life. I want that also." Talus's bioluminescence brightened. "Whatever form that takes, I choose you, Lena, regardless of what the consortium decides. And if Earth refuses to accept you, then we will find a third option. No space between worlds where choice matters more than politics." They stayed awake through the Chamber's night cycle, talking about possibilities neither could guarantee. Lives that spanned species, relationships that defied 7 generations of distance, futures that required building frameworks where none existed. It felt impossible. It felt necessary. It felt like the only choice that mattered. Earth's response arrived on the 107th cycle. Lena watched the transmission with Talus and the facility's senior human volunteers. The message was formal, diplomatic, ultimately evasive. Earth acknowledged the essential role humans had played in blight treatment. Earth recognized the necessity of ongoing contact protocols. Earth proposed a framework for structured interaction that would allow medical and scientific cooperation while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Reading between the diplomatic language, Earth was willing to send volunteers. Earth was not willing to fully integrate. Earth definitely was not endorsing personal relationships between species. "So we're medical tools," Marcus said. "Acceptable at a distance, useful in crisis. But not people who might want to actually live among the aliens we've been saving." "They're afraid," Yuki offered. 7 generations of isolation creates deep cultural conditioning. "The consortium is proposing integration now," Marcus said. "And Earth's response is, we'll think about it." Lena said nothing, reading through the proposal's details. Earth wanted structured rotations, volunteers serving defined terms before returning to human space, no permanent residency. No formal recognition of relationships crossing species boundaries. It was isolation maintained through different protocols. "What are you going to do?" Talis asked quietly after the others left. "I don't know. Earth is offering you a return. Defined service, then home safety. Yes, you could take it. Complete your volunteer term. Return to your stations, your research, your world." Talis's bioluminescence had dimmed. "I would understand that choice. Would you? You are human. Earth is your home. Choosing your own species is rational." "Rational," Lena repeated. "I've built my life on rational choices, staying isolated, avoiding vulnerability, and all that rationality got me was 14 years of competent loneliness." Talis's tendrils moved in patterns Lena couldn't quite read. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to go back. I don't want structured rotations and appropriate boundaries. I want to stay here. With you. Building whatever life we can manage." "Lena, I know it's not rational. I know there are no protocols for this, but I'm choosing you anyway. Choosing this. Choosing to build something new instead of returning to what was safe." Talis crossed the space and pulled Lena close, her bioluminescence brightening to colors so intense they lit the entire chamber. "You are certain?" "No. But I'm choosing anyway." They held each other, and Lena felt the weight of the decision settle into her body. 14 years of isolation ending, a life spent avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability, transformed by the simple choice to stop running from it. The next morning, Lena submitted her formal response. She would complete her current patient rotation. She would assist in training new volunteers, but she would not be returning to Earth. She was requesting permanent residency status in consortium territory. The response was professional, formal, utterly unprecedented. Commander Chen's personal message arrived 6 hours later. "Are you sure? Once you make this choice, returning will be complicated." Lena replied, "I'm sure. Thank you for everything." The Consortium Council summoned her to a formal hearing. Lena stood before the assembled representatives with Talis at her side. "Dr. Kovac," the moderator began, "you request permanent residency. This is unprecedented." "Yes. You understand that Earth may not recognize this choice?" "I understand. You are willing to exist outside the frameworks both our species have established?" Lena looked at Talis. "Yes, I'm willing." The moderator's bioluminescence shifted. "The consortium has never formally recognized romantic relationships between species." "Then perhaps," Talis said, "this is an opportunity to expand that understanding. The Blight taught us that our networks were vulnerable precisely because they were closed systems. Perhaps the same is true of our social structures." The council debated for hours. Lena waited, hand clasped in Talis's. The decision came as the chamber's lighting cycled to evening colors. "We grant Dr. Kovac provisional residency status. Provisional pending development of formal integration protocols. We cannot offer permanence when frameworks do not yet exist. But we can offer presence, acknowledgement, the opportunity to build what has not been built before. It wasn't everything, but it was enough." 6 months after the council's decision, Lena stood in what would become their shared residence, a space allocated for cross-species partnership accommodation. The architecture was compromise made physical, walls shifting between consortium bioluminescence and human electric lighting, furniture adapting to both physiologies. Talis moved through the space with careful attention. "It is strange, creating a home rather than occupying assigned quarters. I have never done this." "Neither have I." "Not really. Lena's various station quarters had been functional spaces, never homes. We're figuring it out together." The blight was contained now, though not eliminated. Consortium Medical Science had developed supplementary treatments, extending intervals between required human contact. Lena's patient rotations had decreased from constant to periodic. It meant time. Time to build a life beyond medical necessity. They developed new rhythms. Mornings spent in gentle contact, waking slowly in each other's warmth. Talis would leave for coordination duties, while Lena completed research work. They would meet for midday meals. Evenings were for exploration, walking through bioluminescent gardens, attending cultural events, learning the rhythms of a world slowly becoming Lena's. But integration was complicated. The consortium citizens Lena encountered treated her with respect, tinged with uncertainty. And the other humans, volunteers who came and went on Earth's structured rotations, treated her with complicated mixtures of admiration and incomprehension. "Does it bother you?" Talis asked one evening. "The way others perceive our relationship?" "Sometimes. Mostly I'm just tired of being symbolic." Lena turned from the window. "I don't want to represent human consortium integration. I just want to be with you." Talis crossed to her. "We cannot control how others interpret our existence, but we can control whether their interpretations define us. You said that before. It remains true." Lena leaned into the contact. "I love you. But sometimes I wonder if love is enough when everything else is so complicated." "Love is not enough," Talis agreed. "We also need patience, flexibility, the willingness to build protocols where none exist. But love is the foundation. Everything else we build on top of it." They stood together at the window, watching the city's lights pulse in patterns Lena was slowly learning to recognize. "I need to tell you something," Lena said quietly. "What is it?" "Earth has been pressuring me to write about my experience here. Documentation of cross-species relationship development to inform policy decisions. And you do not wish to provide this?" "I don't want our relationship reduced to data points." Talis's bioluminescence shifted. "What will you tell them?" "The truth. That relationships are complicated regardless of species, that protocols matter less than individual choice, that they should focus on removing barriers rather than creating new frameworks to control who connects with whom." "They will not like that answer." "No, but it's the only honest one I have." Talis pulled her closer, and they remained at the window, building a life that required honesty more than it required anyone else's approval. The message from Earth arrived on the anniversary of Lena's arrival, 1 full year by consortium calendars. Commander Chen's face appeared on the interface, older, tired. "Dr. Kovac, I'm sending this via private channel because the official communication would be filtered." Lena felt Talis move closer. "Earth's integration committees have been reviewing the volunteer program," Chen continued. "There's a faction arguing for withdrawal, recalling all human volunteers, ending medical assistance programs, returning to modified isolation protocols." The words settled like cold weight. "They're calling it strategic repositioning," Chen said, anger carefully controlled, arguing that humanity has fulfilled its humanitarian obligation, that continued involvement creates dangerous dependencies. "Lena, they're using your choice as evidence, claiming that extended consortium contact leads to cultural dissolution. You've become their case study for why the program should end." Talis's bioluminescence dimmed to colors indicating distress. Her hand found Lena's. "There's going to be a vote," Chen continued. "Earth's governing council 6 weeks from now. If the withdrawal faction wins, all volunteers get recalled, no exceptions. And Lena, they're not planning to recognize permanent residency claims. Anyone who refuses recall could lose citizenship rights." The transmission ended. "They would force you to choose," Talis said quietly. "Between your species and me. They already are. If you return." "I'm not returning." "Lena, listen." Talis's tendrils wrapped around Lena's face, forcing eye contact. "If you lose Earth citizenship, you lose access to human space. You could never visit your homeworld again." "I know. This is not a small thing. This is severing yourself from your entire species." Lena pulled Talis's hands away, but kept holding them. 14 years I spent in human space feeling isolated, alone. And then you were dying and I touched you and everything changed. 1 year is not enough time. I made this decision when I requested permanent residency. This is just Earth making the consequences explicit." Lena's voice was steady. "I'm not going back, not to isolation. I choose this. I choose you, even knowing what it costs." Talis's bioluminescence shifted through patterns too rapid to read. "What if I am not worth that cost?" "You are." "How can you know?" Lena pulled her close. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm actually living rather than just observing. Because this, us, is the only thing that's ever felt important enough to risk everything for." Over following weeks, Lena watched the debate unfold. The withdrawal faction presented their case with cold logic. The integration faction argued that isolation was no longer viable. Both sides used Lena's relationship as evidence. Neither asked what she actually thought. Commander Chen sent another message. There's one thing that might change the vote. If you addressed Earth's Council directly, explained your choice in your own words. Lena stared at the message. Would it matter? Chen's response came quickly. I don't know. But silence guarantees they'll keep using you as a symbol without ever understanding what you're actually choosing. What are you thinking? Tallis asked, finding her sitting in their residence. That I spent 14 years avoiding vulnerability, and now the only way to protect what we have is to make myself completely vulnerable to an entire species' judgment. You do not have to do this. No, but maybe Earth's understanding is. Lena turned to face her. They're afraid. I understand that. But maybe if I can explain what I found here, not just you, but actual connection, actual belonging, maybe some of them will understand. And if they do not, then at least I'll have tried. At least I won't have let fear make decisions for me. Not again. Lena spent 3 days preparing her statement. Not a report. Just honest testimony about isolation and choice. She recorded it in their residence, with Tallis's quiet presence just off camera, and sent it to Earth's governing council with full awareness that it might change nothing. But at least she would have spoken. At least she would have chosen truth over the careful distance that had defined her existence before Tallis. Earth's governing council convened 6 weeks later. Lena watched the proceedings via live transmission with Tallis at her side. The withdrawal faction presented first. Their arguments were logical, data-driven. Cultural dissolution, dependency creation, loss of species identity. They showed Lena's case as evidence. One human, permanently relocated. Relationship with an alien Earth's frameworks couldn't accommodate. Proof that extended contact led to abandonment. Then the integration faction responded. Survival statistics. Billions saved. Catastrophe prevented. They argued isolation was no longer viable. They also used Lena's case as evidence that genuine connection was possible. Both sides spoke about Lena without speaking to her. Then the moderator announced, Dr. Kovac has submitted testimony. We will hear it now. Lena's recorded face appeared on the council's screen. My name is Lena Kovac, her recorded voice began. 14 years I worked in orbital stations, studying species I would never touch, maintaining protocols designed to keep humanity isolated. I was good at isolation. I built my entire life around avoiding vulnerability. And then the blight arrived, and a consortium citizen was dying in my airlock, and all my careful distance seemed suddenly meaningless. I am not asking you to approve my choices. I am simply telling you that for the first time in my adult life, I am not isolated. I am not empty. I am connected to someone in ways that transcend species. You are debating whether to withdraw human volunteers, whether to return to isolation, whether to protect humanity from the risks of genuine integration. And I understand those fears. I spent 14 years living them. But I also know what I found when I finally stopped protecting myself, when I allowed vulnerability, when I chose connection over safety. I found a life, not just competent existence, but meaning, purpose, love that is deliberate rather than biological. You can vote to withdraw. You can decide that integration is too risky, that isolation is safer. But please understand what you are choosing. You are not protecting culture or species identity. You are choosing fear over possibility, safety over growth. The comfortable isolation that kept us alone for 7 generations over the difficult work of building actual connection across difference. I will not return to Earth. I have made my choice. But you, all of you, still have the opportunity to choose differently, to choose courage over caution, to choose the hard work of integration over the easy comfort of isolation. Whatever you decide, I hope you decide from understanding rather than fear. The recording ended. Silence stretched for long seconds. Then debate erupted, representatives arguing with new intensity. The vote came 187 to 163 in favor of maintaining the volunteer program and continuing integration efforts. Earth would not withdraw. The path toward integration remained open. But it was close enough that Lena understood how fragile this all was. Tallis pulled her close when the transmission ended. It is not over, but it is not ending. Not yet. No, not yet. They held each other, and Lena felt the weight of having spoken, having made herself vulnerable, having chosen truth over the careful distance that would have been easier. At least she had spoken. At least she had refused to let fear decide. Spring came to the gathering place, the local equivalent, a season where bioluminescent flora intensified and new growth appeared. Lena stood in the garden space adjacent to their residence, watching color pulse through alien vegetation. 18 months since she'd first touched Tallis and discovered connection was possible across differences that should have been insurmountable. Tallis emerged carrying 2 cups of the compromise beverage they'd developed together, not quite coffee, not quite consortium stimulant, something in between. "The new volunteer rotation arrives tomorrow," Tallis said, settling beside Lena. 6 humans, all requesting extended assignments. Have they been briefed? Extensively. Though I suspect actual experience will teach them more than briefings. Tallis's tendrils moved through Lena's hair. You are expected to meet with them. Share your experience. Lena had become, despite never asking for the role, a liaison between human volunteers and consortium culture. She trained newcomers in medical protocols, but also in subtler aspects. How to read bioluminescence, how to navigate spaces designed for different physiologies, how to maintain boundaries while providing inherently intimate treatment. "How many will stay?" Lena asked. "Permanently? Few? Most will complete service and return, but some will find what you found. Connection that transcends species. And Earth will continue to see them as abandoning species identity. Yes, fear does not dissolve because we wish it to. Integration requires time, generations. We are building foundation, not completion." Lena leaned into Tallis's warmth, feeling the 3-chambered heartbeat that had become the rhythm she measured her life against. "I spoke with Commander Chen yesterday," Lena said. "Earth's integration committees want to formalize the framework for extended assignments, create official pathways for long-term work in consortium space, but not for permanent residency. No, that remains complicated. Officially, I'm still on provisional status, which apparently means we acknowledge you exist but don't know what to do with you." Tallis's tendrils tightened around Lena's shoulders. "Does that bother you?" "Sometimes. But I've learned that official recognition matters less than actual lived experience. We have a home. We have a life. We have each other. The rest is just bureaucracy catching up with reality." "I received a message from someone on Earth," Lena said quietly. "My former supervisor from graduate school. We haven't spoken in 20 years. What did she want?" "To apologize. She said she'd watched my testimony. Said it made her realize how much she'd contributed to my isolation back then. Expecting perfection, discouraging vulnerability. She said she was sorry. And how did that feel? Strange, validating, sad that it took me abandoning an entire species for her to understand what her expectations had cost." Lena turned to meet Tallis's eyes, but also hopeful. If she can recognize it, maybe others can too. Maybe integration isn't just about humans and consortium learning to coexist. Maybe it's also about humans learning that connection doesn't require sacrificing competence. Tallis's bioluminescence brightened. "You have become philosophical. I've had a good teacher." They remained in the garden until the planet's rotation brought nightfall, bioluminescence shifting to softer patterns, the city's coordinated lights dimming to evening rhythms. Lena had learned to read these patterns, to find beauty in their alien choreography, to see the gathering place not as foreign territory, but as home. Inside their residence, they moved through familiar evening rituals, preparing food, accommodating both digestive systems, reviewing schedules, the small domestic negotiations sustaining life regardless of species. And then contact, deliberate now, rather than medically necessary, 6 hours of sustained proximity because they chose it. "I love you," Lena said. "I love you also," Tallis replied, tendrils wrapping around Lena's face. "In my language, chosen symbiosis, partnership that is deliberate, built rather than biological. We've built something good here. We have built foundation. There is more to build, always more. Integration is not a destination we reach, but a process we maintain." They fell asleep pressed together, bioluminescence dimmed to evening patterns, secure in warmth that was chosen rather than necessary. The next morning, Lena stood in the facility's arrival area, waiting for the new volunteer rotation. 6 humans who had completed initial training and chosen extended assignments. She would teach them protocols, proper contact durations, signs of successful treatment versus dangerous overbonding, all the technical knowledge making the work possible. But she would also tell them the truth. That isolation had never been protection. That connection was worth the vulnerability it required. That building lives across difference was harder than staying safely separate, but infinitely more meaningful. Talis joined her at the arrival area, her presence a warm weight at Lena's side. They stood together, human and consortium, partners who had chosen each other when choosing was hardest. The new volunteers arrived, nervous, uncertain, looking at the gathering place's bioluminescent architecture with expressions Lena recognized from her own first moments here, looking at Talis and other consortium citizens with fascination tinged with fear. Lena stepped forward to greet them, feeling Talis's hand find hers, their fingers interlacing in the human gesture they'd both adopted. A small choice, a deliberate connection. "Welcome," Lena said. "Welcome to the work. Welcome to the possibility. Welcome to learning that the distance we maintain to feel safe is often the thing that keeps us from actually living." She began the orientation, teaching them protocols and possibilities in equal measure, building foundation for integration. One conversation, one choice, one deliberately chosen connection at a time. The work continued. The future remained uncertain. But Lena and Talis stood together in it, choosing each other and choosing the difficult work of building what had never existed before, trusting that foundation mattered more than certainty, that connection was worth vulnerability's cost. That love, chosen, deliberate, built across difference, was the only foundation that actually mattered. Around them, the facility's bioluminescence pulsed in steady rhythms. New volunteers began their training. Consortium citizens continued treatments. The galaxy slowly learned that isolation, maintained for 7 generations, could be overcome when catastrophe forced connection and individuals chose to make that connection permanent. Lena had spent 14 years watching from a distance, protecting herself through careful isolation, avoiding vulnerability as if it were weakness rather than the precondition for everything that made life worth living. And then a dying alien had reached for her hand, and everything had changed. She looked at Talis, at the being who had taught her that touch could be necessity and choice simultaneously. That connection required daily renewal, but offered meaning that isolation could never provide. "Ready?" Talis asked quietly. "Yes," Lena said. "Ready." They turned together to face the new volunteers, the ongoing work, the future that required building rather than certainty. Hand in hand, human and consortium, foundation for everything still to come. The distance that had kept them apart for 7 generations was ending, one deliberate choice at a time. And Lena, who had spent her entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability, discovered that the only thing more terrifying than connection was the empty competence of isolation she'd left behind. She had chosen, and in choosing, she had finally begun to live.